Hello and welcome to episode 16 of The Best Games Period. I'm your host, Jack Gardner, and with me today are Jeremy Brown and Erik Scott. Daniel's not here. He's feeling sick. I get it. I was just sick, so...
Yeah, but you showed up when you were sick. Just saying, Daniel.
I showed up one time when I was sick. The time before that, I didn't show up, remember?
That's right.
Although I think I was out of town and sick. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Daniel's the best.
Yeah.
But we have a special guest today. It's our first special guest ever, so that's great. How you doing, Erik?
I'm doing pretty good. So I'm your first special guest. That's an honor. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And you've done some work in video games, so you can kind of give us like an insider's view on what the best game period is, right?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think that's completely subjective. It depends on your taste.
No. Here it is a science.
Right. Science. All right, it's a science. Well, I'm about to contradict myself completely. So my best game ever, I'd say, would be Resident Evil 4, even if I'm not particularly fond of that game anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I was just wondering, before we jump into it, we've started kind of talking about like what games we're playing recently, stuff like that. Also, since you're a special guest, tell us a little bit about what you do, what you're doing, just how life is in general.
Oh, okay. Well, to give a quick preface, I guess, I'm a UI designer for the indie game Tangiers. Yeah, it's a horror game, obviously, more ambient than, I suppose, survival horror.
Well, that works well with what we're going to talk about this week.
Exactly. I've had some involvement with certain games before. There's nothing I can actually disclose on the chat, unfortunately.
Okay.
But you can, as a fun little tidbit, you can actually kill me in FarCry 4. I'm actually in the game, and you can kill me. I'm the FarCry 4 superfan. I'm the famous Pagan Min lookalike. So that's about all there is to know about me for now.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about Tangiers?
Tangiers? Okay, so, let's see. It's a horror game. Obviously it's inspired by Thief, or at least the early versions of Thief, like Thief 1, Thief 2. Nothing with the most recent game. It's mostly based around stealth and takes a lot of inspiration from art movements in the 60s.
Okay.
Aside from that, I really can't tell you much because we're still in beta phase. So, and I can't disclose a lot of information regarding that. I can just say that I made the UI, so things look super nice there.
All right. Well, what have you been playing recently?
A lot of Final Fantasy 14. A lot. More than I'd like to admit. Bloodborne, Demon Souls, some Resident Evil 0 actually. I was streaming that on my Twitch, and I had people coming in asking me how to solve puzzles. So that was fun. I really enjoy the Resident Evil franchise and a lot of horror franchises, but aside from that, I've honestly just been playing 14 because a new patch came out, and I have a static, so I have to be there because I'm a healer, so I have to keep everybody up all the time. It's like my responsibility now, aside from work.
It's your job!
Exactly.
It's your real job.
Exactly. Where are you right now? Oh, I'm going out with my fiancé. Well, why aren't you here healing us? Oh, no. I'm not there healing you.
You have responsibilities.
You gotta get your priorities straight. Make sure everybody's healed before you spend time with your loved ones.
Exactly.
And real quick, Jeremy, how are you doing? What have you been playing?
I think since last week, the only thing I've played, and I might have even said this last week, is the first episode of the Telltale Michonne game. But I think I played that on Friday, so...
Okay.
Yeah.
What are your impressions on that, real quick?
It's cool.
Good,
I mean,
bad?
Me and Telltale and episodic games, I love them. I think it's really cool. I think there's only going to be 3 total. It's not going to be a 5-game series.
Right.
Yeah, I think the narrative, the storytelling is pretty good. The voice acting is great, and it's as suspenseful as a Telltale game can be. And gameplay is pretty much non-existent, but that's okay. since.
Were you able to make the case to your hospital about why you need to rehire an employee that you no longer have?
I haven't
Or hire
haven't
someone else?
gotten a chance to go in front of the positions committee yet, but I did actually at least get the computer side of it done. So that's progress.
Right, the super secret computer side that we can't tell anybody about.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And I'll pretend to be Daniel real quick. Hi, I'm Daniel. I played Rocket League. It was the best thing ever.
Lots and lots of Rocket League. Greatest game ever.
And as for me, I've been playing League of Legends, and I've been working on. I played a little bit of Resident Evil 4 to prepare for this, so well-rounded experience.
I've played so much of that game, I don't think I can have that burned out of my memory.
I'm really interested to hear why you nominated that game for this show, but it is no longer one of your favorite games. So maybe we can just launch right into that.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'll start with my first experience with Resident Evil 4, and
Okay.
that was actually at the first gaming convention I had ever been to when I was 12.
Oh my goodness.
My dad had taken me to Gen Con in Anaheim, California. That was the first and last time I'd ever go because it was the last year it was going. There was a Nintendo booth there.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, the representative there was letting me, a 12-year-old, play Resident Evil 4, and I just couldn't believe that this was Resident Evil, at all. Because I had played Remake 0, 2, 3, I was really, really into the franchise.
Yeah.
My parents were very liberal when it came to ratings on games. They were like, well, you know this isn't real and it doesn't scare you, it's not giving you nightmares, so go ahead and play it. So I was sitting there playing, and I just could not believe, one, this was Leon, because I remember Leon being this really dorky cop,
Yep.
with orange-brown hair, and the gameplay being vastly different. But I was absolutely enamored with the game. I remember going back to school and telling everybody about it, even though no one was really into games at the time. But I would tell my friends oh my god, I think I played Resident Evil. I'm not sure though. I don't remember. But there was a chainsaw guy, and it was really, really awesome. I died a lot. It was really great. When that game came out, I bought it twice. I bought it on the PS2 and on the GameCube. I remember getting that game the day it came out, and I think that was the first purchase I ever made as well, of my own money, for a video game, was Resident Evil 4.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I was absolutely enamored with this game when it had first come out.
Question.
Yes?
I know that it went through several different iterations before it finally came out. Did you play one of the a final-ish build of the game, or was it one of the kind of different when you played it at Gen Con?
I played the basically what would be considered the final build.
Okay.
And that would be you get to the area where Leon would fight the chainsaw. Basically he'd fight Dr. Salvador.
Yeah.
And they'd ring the bell, and he'd make his witty one-liner, and then that was it. And that was the end of the demo. It was basically just endure. If you live long enough, then you get to the end of the demo, and then you got a lanyard or something. But I was the only one standing in line because this con was completely devoid of life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was empty.
Oh, geez.
So I just sat around playing that all day.
Sorry, I cut you off.
I don't know. Resident Evil 4, when I had first played it, was an experience. It was absolutely wonderful. But now I don't know.
Well, yeah. How about Jeremy? What was your first experience with Resident Evil 4?
Well, it was my first survival horror game I ever tried to play.
And you don't do super well with horror, right?
Well, no, I'm better. I'm better.
Daniel?
Well, I think it's both of us. I'm better now than I was. You got to remember, in 2005, I was a still fairly fresh gaming person. I bought it on the GameCube, and it just scared me so much that I eventually traded that in for something back when I used to trade in games. And then I don't think it was at launch, but probably about a year later, I bought it on the PlayStation 2 and played through it, and enjoyed it quite a bit. But yeah, first I couldn't play at night. I could only play during the daytime, and it took me a while to get used to the aiming and controls. But it was a lot of fun once I got past being scared and learned the gameplay mechanics and whatnot. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm a really unique case because I first played it on the Wii, actually. Like, I was not a big survival horror person until I played Dead Space, actually, which has a striking number of similarities to Resident Evil 4, I think. To its credit, I think that's a good thing. And on the Wii version, you actually it plays very similarly, but you actually, whenever you stop to aim, you can use the Wii remote to aim. I actually like that quite a bit. Thought it worked pretty well. And I don't think a lot of shooters can say that when it comes to the Wii. I might actually go out on a limb and say that it's probably one of the most functional and fun shooters on the Wii, even though it's not technically a shooter, it's survival horror.
It can't be better than Link's crossbow training.
Shun, get out of this podcast. Take your mini game with you. Anyway, yeah. So what makes you think that this is one of the best games, period, but it is not one that you would necessarily say is your favorite now?
I think what makes it one of the best games, period, like hands down, is its impact on the gaming industry as a whole. It completely changed the survival horror genre. If you look at the past iterations of Resident Evil, it ultimately stayed the same up until Resident Evil 0. Mm-hmm. And it was using the same formula, and it was obviously getting very burnt out and very tired. Now, Resident Evil 0 is my favorite Resident Evil. And I say that with like a very heavy heart, that the formula was really burnt out. You could tell because of the scores it was getting, but this could also be said for the Silent Hill franchise as well. Mm-hmm. That even Silent Hill 3 and 4 had been scoring fairly lowly in magazines, at least from what I remember, but this is again like a very long time ago. That despite being cult classics, people were getting tired of this. And if Resident Evil 4 hadn't come along and I guess changed things, I imagine the horror genre or survival horror genre would be very different from how it is now. Dead Space would probably not even have come to fruition in the way it did. Third-person shooters wouldn't be as popular. Like, Resident Evil 4 really changed a lot of things. It left its impact, in a good and bad way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, it's, you know, even third-person action games would be a lot different. One of the things I found out while I was kind of doing my homework on this game to prepare for the podcast is that one of the earliest builds of Resident Evil 4 actually became Devil May Cry.
That's Resident Evil 2, actually.
Was it Resident Evil 2?
Resident Evil 2, yes. It became Devil May Cry. The first Devil May Cry game. They were trying something out, they wanted something more action-oriented, and Kamiya took it and made Devil May Cry. With a scrap build. Like, Haunting Ground, or Demento, is actually a scrapped build of one of the Clock Tower games. That was when Capcom was just taking all these prototypes and just making them their own entities at this point. It was really wild time.
That's so crazy. And it's weird to compare Capcom of, 10 years ago to Capcom today, because I feel like people have a very different idea of how Capcom works. Like, back then was the Wild West, where, like, any idea kind of became its own franchise or game, and now it's just kind of, like, not exactly like that anymore.
Yeah, it's very different. A lot of those people have left to Platinum, and it's very obvious that the people behind a lot of these really, I'd say, defining titles that Capcom used to, like, just have and release, bi-yearly or yearly, are just not part of the studio anymore. It's very obvious.
Yeah. But you're right, it changed a lot of things. Like, for the horror genre, for, like, I feel like when you go back and play Resident Evil 4 today, you can still see its influence in even modern games. Like, I feel like the gothic aesthetic in Resident Evil 4 kind of shows up in, like, Dark Souls and the Souls games.
I wouldn't really say that, because Dark Souls, Demon Souls, and Bloodborne are all heavily inspired by Berserk. Miyazaki has said that in several interviews.
Yeah.
I only know this because my fiance is absolutely into Souls. And the only reason they watched Berserk was because of Souls. So the gothic influence is very different, but I would say that the general atmosphere of Resident Evil has basically crept into most Western horror titles as well. as opposed to Eastern, because there's a difference between Western and Eastern horror, which Resident Evil 4 had kind of departed from. It basically became more Western, or catered itself towards a more Western audience. If I remember correctly at the time, Call of Duty was also very popular in the West, and horror was struggling to get a foothold, so why not just modernize it, make it to a shooter, Westernize it? Make it more fear of the known as opposed to fear of the unknown. Get rid of the camera angles that kind of obscured things and made you feel like trapped and isolated, and why not cater to a different audience? And I mean, it worked very well. Because there was an interview in Game Informer that I read. This is what actually made me buy Dead Space, was that the developers of Dead Space had actually admitted to being heavily influenced by Resident Evil 4 and Silent Hill 2, especially Resident Evil 4 with its gameplay mechanics. And this is, like, really heavily felt.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, it's, like, not just because, like, the oppressive atmosphere, the way some of the enemies are, etc. Like, it's just, all of it's very present in some of these titles. It's, like, again, even though Resident Evil 4 is probably one of my least favorite Resident Evil titles now, it's hands down a game I think that everyone should play at least once, even though it hasn't aged very well.
And is it one of your least favorite now because it hasn't aged well, or for other reasons?
No, for other reasons. It gave me Resident Evil 5, which I had actually completely hated when I played it. I swore off all Resident Evil games after 5, but that was because of the narrative. I thought the narrative was just it was different. But Resident Evil as a whole has changed. It's more dramatic horror as opposed to survival horror.
Yeah.
And because of Resident Evil 4 to taken that departure, I don't really like most of the game. I've realized with Resident Evil 4 after the village. I really don't enjoy the castle segments. I don't enjoy the island. Playing Resident Evil 4 and then playing Resident Evil 6's Leon's campaign, you can really tell that these two are very similar. It starts off pretending to be a survival horror game, and then it goes right into the action. You're shooting ganados and having firefights and whatnot, and that's where the game just completely loses me.
Yeah. Although I will say that I think that opening segment in the village,
it's amazing.
It is incredible. It's amazing even now, like going back to that. Just
it's
approaching
such a defining moment. It's wonderful. It sets up the game and opens it perfectly. Just the tension from that fight, like just having to survive those, like, I think 5 minutes or something, or either just gunning him down, going to that house, moving all the boxes and stuff, or the bookshelves in front of the windows as you're, like, frantically trying to, like, get the shotgun and just survive. It's amazing. Like, the tension, the atmosphere in that moment, just the feeling, it really stays with you. Absolutely remember from that.
And the game keeps throwing curveballs at you, like, oh, I can move furniture in front of the windows. Wait, what? This cabinet is nailed to the wall? I can't... Okay. That changes... Like, just little things like that can change everything in that scenario, depending on how you approach it, and depending on how you play it. It can, progress very differently in the minute-to-minute gameplay of how you survive that segment.
Let's also not forget the QTEs, the introduction of the QTEs.
Yes. Probably one of my least favorite things that people took away from Resident Evil 4. I feel like Resident Evil 4 and God of War really kind of pushed QTEs into the mainstream of gaming.
I absolutely agree.
Not a huge fan.
I hadn't even seen a QTE until I had played Resident Evil 4.
And I think Resident Evil 4 is one of the few games where I actually kind of like the QuickTime events. Like, they're not my favorite thing ever, but when they happen, like, you have to always be paying attention to the cutscenes, because it throws these QuickTime events at you, and if you fail, you die. And the game isn't really... doesn't really throw you a bone when it comes to those things.
No, I died, I think, like 20 times to that Krauser fight, that knife battle, just the CGI thing. I died so much. My hands were sweaty, and I was, like, shaking. I was, like, so nervous. Like, sitting in front of my GameCube, just trying this QTE battle. It was ridiculous. It's not even hard, but it was just so new and unfamiliar to me. I was like, I can't, like, get up and leave, like, as the cutscene's going on. Like, I have to sit here.
Jeremy, you've been kind of quiet. Where are you falling on these QuickTime events and all this stuff?
I agree that with what you said about this and God of War kind of slinging them into the mainstream of gaming. I don't really have a problem with them in general, I suppose, as long as you're not playing the entire game that way, says the Telltale fan. And if it doesn't, like, I guess in Resident Evil 4, I didn't really feel like it took away from the intensity too much. It wasn't really overused. And, therefore it was kind of, you did have to pay attention to the cutscenes. And it felt like it was just another part of the gameplay experience, not you knew once you got to every boss, say, like in God of War, where you're going to have to press triangle, circle, X, square, over and over and over again. And I suppose the other game that comes to mind that uses them quite a bit is Uncharted, the Uncharted series.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, I've never been one of those anti-quick time event people.
One of the first things I ever wrote that like people actually read a lot online was just me going off on quick time events. I'm not a huge fan, but I agree with you. Like there are ways you can use QuickTime events that aren't completely terrible, and I feel like that's the case with like a lot of games that kind of spawn movements or spawn, that are really influential and just kind of spawn copycats. Mm-hmm. Like the one that started it did it really well. Like they did them okay. The ones that come after are the ones that ruin that.
Like in God of War, where you have to almost break your fingers just to open a chest. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's unnecessary.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So, Eric, can you summarize for us, because this is a spoiler. We don't care about spoilers on this, but can you summarize the plot of Resident Evil 4?
All right.
Give it your best shot.
Rookie cop gets an upgrade to rookie, CIA agent, has to rescue president's daughter in vaguely Spanish Europe.
Why are they sending rookie special agent to rescue the president's daughter? Wouldn't they be sending super experienced special agent?
The thing is, with Leon, his gimmick is that it's always his first day on the job.
Do they do that again in 6?
No, they don't do that.
Okay.
Completely different team that did that. That's why that's kind of like fallen off. But if you read the Resident Evil archives, this is just a fun tidbit, because again, like I used to be like a huge Resident Evil fan.
Yeah.
The reason he was late for work in Resident Evil 2 was because his girlfriend had dumped him, and he was at a party drinking and like crying about it.
Oh my goodness. That is the worst first day on the job.
Yeah. Then he goes to Raccoon City and he's like, oh my god, this is the worst.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so like basically rookie CIA agent goes to vaguely Spanish Europe, figures out that there's some sort of like bioterror attack going on, experimentation involving parasites, fights cult leader, saves girl, sees Asian girlfriend. That's it. Like that's the summary of the game.
And then you go to a castle and
then you run from a giant robot of a small man.
Yeah.
It's wild. Like, you think about some of these things, you're like, I cannot believe that was actually in the game. Like, I can't believe that was there. Like, I think it was 5, you QTE a boulder. You actually punch a boulder.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a moment I'll never forget in that game. Like I said earlier, like, I really hated Resident Evil 5, but now I really like it. Just like I used to really like Resident Evil 4, but now I'm kind of like, about it. It's not like my favorite game. But yeah, thinking about... Oh, and the lasers. The lasers in Resident Evil 4. That scene.
The lasers. Man. I don't remember that part.
You don't remember the Hall of Lasers?
No.
So, Leon walks down, like, this fucking chrome hallway, and these lasers, like, basically, just start up on either side. And they come at him, you have to QTE, and he, like, runs up the wall and flips over them, and it's, like, this really, like, enticing, like, moment where he lands, like, really hot and sexy, and he's, like, capable, and, like, it just changes the tone of his character so much, but it's just, I don't know how to describe it. Like, there are moments like that in this game, and I just can't believe they happen.
That part's hilarious to me because he goes through the whole hallway doing just the quick time events and making these amazing moves through the lasers. Then he gets to the door and there's a red button and a green button. He presses the red button, and that's when those ones come up where he has to jump up the wall and flip over them. And then it turns green, and it says, "The door can now be opened." And it's just like, okay.
One of my favorite parts about Leon Kennedy as a character in Resident Evil 4 is just how unfazed he is by everything that happens around him. Like, walks into a small Spanish town where everyone is just trying to murder him. Then a bell rings and they leave. And he just...
Yeah, he's like, oh, where's everyone going, bingo? Like, okay.
Why would you say that? Why aren't you on your comm going, hey guys, this entire village just tried to murder me. Can you send in some backup? Or, I don't know. He's just completely unshaken by anything that happens to him in crazy zombie land.
Yeah, the only real emotion I remember is when the helicopter got shot down and he said he would make him pay for it, Mike, or whatever the pilot's name was.
Yeah, he's like, no, Mike!
Yeah.
As Mike is shot down by a bazooka, he's like, no, my only friend!
Didn't he just meet that guy a few minutes before that, too?
Yeah, like
over the comm?
You're fighting this big compound. You're fighting this huge compound, and Mike just flies in and starts, like, shooting everything. You're like, oh my god, Mike's my savior. But you, the player, also feel this, because you're like, I don't want to deal with this shit right now.
Yeah.
Like, I'm getting shot at, I just want to go, and Mike saves you, and then Mike just gets blown up, and that's it. And Leon's, like, really upset. He's like, they'll pay for what they did to Mike. It's like, alright.
I do have to say, this is probably one of the first games I've seen that has, within, like, the first 5 minutes of the game starting, you see a police officer just peeing on the side of the road.
Such a long scene, too.
It
But
is.
he apologizes for taking so long, so...
He does. But it's just like, why was that part in there? Like, just so that he could say, oh man, it's getting kind of creepy and cold outside.
I suppose it's from the perspective of someone who would be watching, but I don't know why you would be watching some man pee in the woods, but I guess it's to set the scene up. Like, you're being stalked through the forest. It's like one of those things.
Yeah, that's
like,
kind of how I
you
felt
pull
about
over
it.
and maybe someone's watching you. It's weird.
Yeah, because they show that
Yeah.
camera view from behind where it did seem like someone was maybe watching him. I kind of thought he was going to get killed right there, honestly.
So, one of my big questions about this game, does it change things that these people have parasites in them as opposed to just being straight up zombies?
Yes, it does. So
Okay.
the Lost Plagos, the parasite in Resident Evil 4, is actually controlled through like a hive mind. So the guy that has like the ultimate parasite, I'm using like air quotes right now, just imagine this ultimate parasite, can control anyone else affected by the Lost Plagos. So what they were doing, I think it's Sadler.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah,
Sadler?
Sadler.
Yeah, Sadler. So like Sadler, Salazar,
Yeah.
he has like the master parasite, and he was going onto this village, like basically making this cult and shoving this parasite into people, and as a result they were infecting others via the parasite, like hopping from host to host to host, and he made himself like a tiny little baby army. And there's actually like vague political undertones at the end, where Sadler is talking about America trying to police the world and whatnot. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
But it gets kind of like brushed over because then you like blow them up with like a rocket launcher or something, and that's that.
It kind of undermines your point when you're being exploded.
Exactly. But yeah, it changes. It doesn't change their physiology as much as it does with the other strain that's in Resident Evil 6 and Resident Evil 5.
Yeah. Well,
But you have, like, the thing that makes you not want to do headshots anymore, because if you do a headshot, the parasite will pop out, and then you have to deal with an even stronger version of the enemy, and it's awful, and I hate that.
Well, I guess I kind of meant, does it change things from a horror perspective? Because, I mean, they kind of still act like zombies, except they can use tools and weapons and stuff like that. But, I don't know. It seems odd to me that they went from kind of zombies being their traditional enemies to parasite victims. Am I?
Yeah, it
articulating
makes a lot of
myself?
sense.
Okay.
Like I mentioned earlier, Resident Evil had it just stagnated. So imagine like playing all the Resident Evil games up until 0, and then Resident Evil 4 is being released, and you're fighting these people, and you're like, oh, they're basically just like, they're just using weapons, they're zombies, I guess, and then when you hit the sequence at night, and you're shooting this guy down, and suddenly his head explodes and a parasite comes out, that's terrifying. You're like, what is this? What? I think it's infinitely more dangerous as well in terms of gameplay, because some of them can one-shot you if you're not careful.
Right.
If you get too close to some, they'll just decapitate you, and that's it. It's the end of the story. But I think at first it was a lot more terrifying than fighting zombies, and it was a welcome departure. Now, I just think it's really irritating. In terms of, like, a gameplay mechanic. I'm like, okay, this guy's gonna change now. I'll have to, like, waste 10 extra rounds on him. Oh boy. Like, this is how my feeling has progressed from when I first played Resident Evil 4 all the way through playing 4 and, like, all of its iterations and re-releases, 5, and then 6. Like, I'd rather just, like, fight a zombie and just have it take a lot of rounds than have to fight a transformed version of an enemy I just downed again.
Yeah. I don't know. I find it harder to, like, turn off my brain when they're not zombies too. Like, when something's a zombie, it's clearly like, well, you kill a zombie, you know, because it's a zombie. But when it's an infection, at that point, I'm kind of like, I don't know, are there weird moral complications to killing someone who's infected with a parasite, especially when we find out later that parasites can be kind of, you know, removed, or, like, these people could be cured?
Well,
possibly.
I mean, but if you're gonna die if you don't, I don't know.
Right. I mean,
I would suppose it would depend on the game, and, like, certain things. Like, in Resident Evil, it's made very clear that, like, there's no saving you once you go back. Like, you're done.
right.
It's final. It's finite.
If there was a barn you could store them all in until you could get them to the machine that zaps the plague, then that would be one thing. But there's not.
Right.
You know, you have to take them out, or else they're going to take you out.
There's something in me that, like, empathizes with these villagers. I'm just like, I really don't want to murder an entire town of people.
Oh, I felt super, super bad about all of this, especially see the cutscenes. Like,
Yeah.
at the very end, the credits, they have, like, these drawn images of, like, the village being happy and everything. And everyone's getting along, and it's great. And then Sadler comes, and he's, like, infecting people, and you see these people turning, and then you see, like, these, like, stills of them, like, killing their family and things. It's really awful. Like, I felt really terrible. I was like, wow, this is rough.
Yeah.
Me, a 12-year-old saying this is rough. But I suppose it would depend, yeah, like he said, Jeremy said. If you could just kind of, like, corral them and whatnot and get into the zapping machine, that'd be one thing. But at that point, they're too far gone anyways. They're not even, like, a person, I guess, with, like, the in-game lore. It'd be different if it was, like, The Last of Us, where you, like, they're still there. Like, the people are still alive. They're still, like, aware inside of that.
Mm-hmm.
In Resident Evil, it's not really ever the case. It's very direct on its approach with this.
Right.
So I suppose there's no real question of morality.
But I guess I would feel bad knowing that I could save somebody, but I couldn't, and having to kill them as opposed to a traditional zombie.
I mean, I feel like Resident Evil 4 is kind of like this interesting bridge between old school games and kind of more modern things. Because when you first brought up that you wanted to do Resident Evil 4, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Because it kind of has this plot that would work in, like, a Super Nintendo game, where it's like, you're a secret agent, go rescue the president's kidnapped daughter. But it also kind of tries to bring in these more complex themes and, like, these questions and kind of, like, stuff about morality and, like you said, like, kind of this weird political undertone. But it also doesn't have the chops to really pull off that stuff in a serious way. And it kind of, like, constantly undercuts itself with, like, Leon Kennedy sexily jumping through laser wires, or, like, all this other stuff, like popping off one-liners after a village massacre. Like,
Knife fight with Ada, everything like that, yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel like it's an interesting turning point where games are like, okay, we can try to do something more mature, but not quite knowing how to go about doing that, if that makes sense.
I absolutely agree with that, in terms of, like, how the narrative of the Resident Evil games changed and like how it's presented itself.
Mm-hmm.
I think the games after 4 definitely okay, they're handled a lot more seriously than I guess 4 would. 4 is pretty campy, I would agree.
Yeah.
And then, okay, like, if you also look at, like, Resident Evil 1, it's very, like, B-grade horror movie, the original one. It's very B-grade horror film. Only in Remake did they kind of, like, change the tone of that game and make it more of, like, this real, like, what a real survival horror game is. So I remember I was like, I want to talk about Resident Evil Remake on this, and I was like, no, I want to talk about Resident Evil 4. Because I think Resident Evil Remake is probably one of the best survival horror games of all time, but only within that genre. It doesn't have the scale of Resident Evil 4.
Okay.
But Remake really reasserts itself as, I would say, one of the kings of survival horror in terms of tone, how it was rewritten, presented, even though a lot of the pauses and nuances in speech are more suited towards like a Japanese audience and presented in more of like an Eastern way. Because, again, like, acting and whatnot is very, very different in Japan.
Yeah.
I say this as like, I'm going to tell people right now, because people probably going to look at my face like, oh, Erik Scott, look at that white boy. No, I'm actually half Japanese. The way things are presented and the way they are thematically is very different from East and West. And in Remake, that's very evident. Some people are like, well, there are a lot of, like, direct dialogue pauses, or it's, or just the way things are handled, like, thematically. I know I keep repeating myself, but in Resident Evil 4, again, it's, like, more westernized in terms of its approach. There aren't these dramatic pauses, things go a bit faster, it's not trying to take itself as seriously as it was in the past, especially with that, Remake and Zero and whatnot. It gets kind of, like, silly and fun. So, like you said, it tries to handle mature themes, but then it just kind of, like, goes back about, like, 10 steps with all these, like, pauses or intermissions with the Ada knife fight, the being chased by a giant marble statue.
The tiny Napoleon man with tentacles.
Oh my god. Yeah. Do you remember the Vertigo fight?
Oh, only a little bit. It's been a long time since I played through the entire game, but there are definitely moments that stick out to me. I don't think that's one of them, though.
So, for you two, what are the 2 moments that stick out most for you in Resident Evil 4?
Ooh. I mean, can we just take the village part as kind of a given?
Yeah, that would be definitely one of mine.
Yeah.
Okay. Other than the village part, I'd have to say the jet ski escape at the end.
Oh my god, yeah.
Partly because I enjoyed the concept of it quite a bit, but also because it was absolutely infuriating to me because I just could not get it right when I was playing through it the first time. Just kept so many deaths. And this might be kind of stupid, but I remember playing through with Claire in metal armor, and there are just so many slapstick moments. And then it was your turn, Jeremy.
Well, you stole my jet ski one. And
okay. Well, we could have the same favorite moment. It's not a competition.
I don't know. I think overall, like a collective of all of Leon's cheesy one-liners, because you know how I love those, really sticks out to me and is pretty memorable. The castle sequence, like I wasn't a huge fan of that part, but it still amused me. The little guy, Salazar, was that his name? I forget. Like he just kind of amused me as a character, and I liked how when Leon threw his knife through his hand, that in the next scene with him, his hand was miraculously healed. Although that might be an actual part of the Lost Plagueis lore, I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's what sticks out to me. And it just being my first real survival horror experience that I made it through.
I have to say another moment that sticks out to me is the very first QuickTime event in the game. The gigantic boulder that 3 people just It's just like three random people just have a giant boulder waiting for Leon, and they push it, and the quick time event is Leon just running away from this boulder.
Oh, you gotta,
Very
we
Indiana
gotta
Jones
tap
style.
a button a whole bunch and then dodge at the end. That one.
Yep. Yeah. I know I died several times to that just because I wasn't ready for it. And I like the idea of, everyone who definitely wasn't prepared for quick time events in Resident Evil just being crushed by this boulder.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I got killed the first time.
Oh, we haven't even talked about this. My absolute most favorite part of Resident Evil 4 is the merchant.
I was going to bring that up if you didn't. I remembered that while you were talking. What you buying?
What are you selling?
And the inventory part was cool, too. I think it was the first game I played like that where you really couldn't keep everything you found. Which I hated at first, but I ended up appreciating it in time.
What? So, Eric, as our Resident Evil expert, or I meant to say Resident Evil expert. I screwed that up. But what is there any information about that shopkeeper and who he is?
Oh, well, there's, honestly nothing about him. He's just, this mysterious stranger who just shows up and, sells Leon guns for whatever reason. Nothing is ever explained about his existence or where he came from exactly. People were speculating a lot of things because if you look at his model, he has red eyes, and it's clear he's infected, but he never attacks you, and he just kind of, shows up.
Yeah.
So, I always loved, killing the fish in the lake. And then selling them to him or hoarding them in my inventory until the end of the game.
That's actually another one of the things I was going to ask you about. Were you a hoarder in Resident Evil 4? I mean, you just said you hoarded the fish, but did you, try and hoard everything? As much as you could?
Okay, despite the fact that flashbangs were super helpful, if you use them on an enemy that had, a Plagas, the enemy would automatically die.
Right.
But I hated flashbangs, so I sold them every opportunity. I didn't have any grenades on me at any time.
Why'd you hate the flashbangs?
I just don't like grenades. They just they just took up inventory space to me. I'd rather have that giant fuck off fish in my inventory than the flashbangs. So I'd run around the game with just a sniper rifle and the blacktail.
Yep.
And that was how I played the game. And I'd have the giant fish, ammunition, and then I'd just go through with that. I didn't even use the Magnum because of the Krauser fight, you just had to knife him to death, and that was it.
Yep.
You didn't have to use any kind of ammunition on him whatsoever. It wasn't particularly difficult. But in terms of hoarding things, mostly just the fish. If I had the yellow herb and the green herb and the red herb, I can combine them and almost use them immediately because what's the point?
Right.
But I was very good about not getting hit and not having to expend a lot of resources because I'd take advantage of shooting an enemy in the knee and then prompting a kick.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, and you just real quick, you told me while we were having some technical difficulties just now that you have an entire corner of your house with signed Resident Evil stuff.
Oh yeah, I did talk about that. Okay, so basically in this entire corner in our room, because we have a gaming room, we have signed copies of most of the Resident Evil games. I'd say almost all of them, actually. There's a copy of Resident Evil 4 signed by Kobayashi just, staring me in the face right now. And the Resident Evil 4 GameCube chainsaw controller with serial number.
Did you actually play Resident Evil 4 with that controller?
My fiance did, yes. And they said that it was fun, but also a bit difficult because of just the way the controllers, but it vibrates. We also have it's a special limited edition Resident Evil 6, and it has all the emblems, and it has a serial number as well, along with a steel box and a couple of signed items. My fiance and I actually met playing Resident Evil 6, so Resident Evil is a franchise I hold very near and dear to my heart, despite having this really wild obsession with it when I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
I had this blog, I was running a really popular blog for a while, and they messaged me asking me if I could play with them sometime, and I gave them this super rude response. If you asked them, they'd say that I was super rude, because I just was well, who do you play? And they were Chris. I was okay, that's okay, because I can't play Chris. I couldn't stand Chris for the longest time. I just refused to play him. Mm-hmm. So if they had answered otherwise, I probably wouldn't have played with them.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I was kind of a snob about that. But yeah, that's how we met, through Resident Evil 6, and then we played that together and started playing everything else together. We played 5 together, and then we eventually moved to like different games that we ended up multiplayering together.
Aw, that's sweet. It's sweet after the part where you almost didn't get together because she may or may not have played the right character.
Exactly. They may or may not have played Chris Redfield. So
So what would your ideal Resident Evil look like? What would, like, your ideal Resident Evil 7, I guess?
it's pretty hard for me to imagine what Resident Evil 7 would be like, especially with the information they've given us now.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding it involving Rebecca Chambers, Chris Redfield, and Leon S. Kennedy. We don't know if it's going to be a reboot or if it's going to be another game tailored to dramatic horror, or if they're going to basically make it in the style people have been craving, which is the old survival horror, fixed camera angles, pre-rendered backgrounds, limited ammunition. But Resident Evil Remake for the GameCube or Resident Evil Remake HD for the PS4, PS3, that's what I would want a Resident Evil game to be like. That is what I believe that Resident Evil was at the height of its, I guess the height of its run, I would say.
Okay.
That's probably, in my opinion, the perfect example of what Resident Evil should be. Even if people won't agree with me on that.
And you even want them to bring back, like, the Crimson Heads?
Oh my god, yeah, the Crimson Heads. Okay, because like nothing was more terrifying to me than the Crimson Heads, because that mechanic, it was just like, hey, you might want to burn the bodies if you find the chance. And me, being young, was like, well, I don't care. Like, nothing bad's gonna happen, right? Because I heard Jill scenarios easy, and I always played Jill scenarios before I played Chris. And also, for that sweet grenade launcher glitch they ended up patching out with the most recent edition. And I was running through this hallway, and I just hear this, like, shuffling of, like, feet and clothes, and this noise of, like, someone breathing. I just see this thing running at me from the back of the camera angle, and I just start screaming, and I just run through the next door, and I just never went back into that room ever. I just couldn't go back. Like, I think that is really terrifying, when something you're familiar with changes and becomes a lot more daunting or challenging to you as a player, because Crimson Heads were pretty hard to take down if you didn't want to waste ammunition. So it was a mess.
How do you feel about the modern horror genre following the popularity of stuff like Amnesia and Penumbra, Outlast?
I don't really like Amnesia. I don't like Outlast. I was actually very bored with Outlast. I never finished it because I didn't find the game particularly scary. I didn't like its storyline, and I thought the repetition of picking up, like, 5 keys to get to the next room, being chased around by, like, a naked man or a guy with, like, scissors was just really aggravating, as opposed to actually horrifying. I don't really like Western horror. I'm not a big fan of first-person horror games because I don't like jump scares. I'm a bigger fan of, like, psychological horror or true survival horror, where you have that sense of isolation that's really embedded in the game, like, thematically. I really enjoyed Soma, though. I will say that. I really like Soma, because I really love System Shock. I guess those are the Western games that I absolutely enjoy. But in terms of, like, where the horror genre and the horror industry is now, I'm not really a fan. I wouldn't actively seek out anything. I'd go and play games like Demento, Haunting Ground, the old Resident Evil games, Silent Hill 1 through 4, before I'd even consider picking up anything else. I mean, I played The Evil Within, and it wasn't particularly stellar either. I don't want to, like, bash on it or anything. It definitely wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And you were kind of hoping it would be kind of a return to classic styles?
I thought it would actually be psychological horror. I really didn't enjoy its narrative. I didn't have any attachment to any of the characters, unfortunately. That's a big part of it for me. And people are probably going to say, well, Eric, the Resident Evil characters have, like, so little character development. How can you have investment in these people? I'm like, because they're just so memorable. Like, Jill Valentine, Chris Redfield, Albert Wesker, Rebecca Chambers. I can probably name almost every single Resident Evil character off the top of my head, just because of the way I was introduced to them, and just the naming conventions are so great.
Right.
And what they like left behind. But in terms of, like, The Evil Within, it felt as though it was trying to be psychological horror and survival horror, but it felt more like a watered-down Resident Evil 4 clone and kind of directionless in its plot. In the end, basically nothing mattered, so why did I play the game? What was the point of it, like...
Right.
Yeah. I think PT is the only first-person horror game that I've played, aside from Soma, that I really enjoy because it really frightens me. I have a very, very big fear of the occult and the supernatural. So it was more or less walking around that house, hearing Lisa breathing, looking in the corners of the room, just seeing her standing there or watching you, that just really affected me. It wasn't so much coming in direct contact with her that really bothered me, even though I did almost cry once, because I was so scared. It was just a lasting effect of knowing someone was watching me, being there, having to walk through this room time and time again with the fear of her looking back at me in the bathroom mirror or standing outside the house looking in. It's just that alone is so unsettling that I thought that was just amazing. Like I don't know, I think PT really could have done something great. A shame it's not, going to happen ever.
It still might, sort of. Guillermo del Toro.
Name. Yeah, probably with a different name and with a different publisher, definitely.
Well, I think there have been some hints that what's his name, Kojima was hanging out with Guillermo and Norman Reedus recently.
Yeah, it won't be Silent Hills, definitely, but it'll have a different name if it ever comes to fruition, definitely.
People would go bonkers over that.
Yeah. I just want a good survival horror game again.
Oh, you sounded so sad.
Yeah. Well, survival horror was the root of my childhood.
Yeah.
I've been playing Resident Evil since I was 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 25 now. This is a franchise that I've always adored and have always loved. I own every single installment of the franchise. I even own Gaiden, which is a Game Boy Advance game where you have to hit a little trigger to kill an enemy and wander around a cruise ship. It's I don't think many people remember that game.
But you do.
Yeah, I do, because it was a pain. I had to restart the thing 3 times to beat it. But survival horror is something that I really enjoy. And I guess even though I'm not fond of Resident Evil 4 anymore, I can appreciate what it's done and at least cause survival horror to live in its longevity for some degree. It spawned Dead Space and other games like that, and those aren't necessarily bad games either. They're just Western horror, and it's just a matter of taste.
Right. So, where do we... I feel like... Jeremy, where do you stand on Resident Evil 4? Because I feel like...
Well...
I don't know. I don't know where you stand on it.
It's, not one of my personal all-time favorite games, but I definitely think it's one of the best games, period. And I think for some of the reasons Eric mentioned earlier on, the reason people should, play it or at least consider playing it is because of the impact it did have on the industry. It was a hugely popular game when it came out. It scored pretty well, critically. Yeah. No, and it's still on a lot of people's top lists of games of all time. So, I think it's got a historical impact, and that's, generally speaking, one of my personal criteria for deciding if something is one of the best games, period. It's highly accessible. I mean, there's versions of it, on the Zebo, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, we learned what the Zebo was when we were learning about this game. It's like a console that they released in Brazil, China, and Mexico, those different areas around the world, and it's sort of like a Wii, but not. It has this boomerang-shaped controller that I think you're supposed to use with both hands, but it's also a motion controller. It is one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in my life, and it came out in 2009, around the same time as the Wii, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot after that. I think I read 2009, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. And so it's this tiny white box, and apparently it was being sold in China up until last year. So the Zebo, look that up.
So yeah, Jack, it's definitely on the best games period list for me. How about yourself?
Like Erik said, it's one of the defining survival horror games of all time, and games in general would be very different without it. Horror especially would be very different without it. And like you said, it is very accessible, both from the standpoint of it's easy to get a hold of a copy right now, but also from the standpoint of, picking up the controls and actually playing it. Although I know it's available on iOS and Android, and I don't know how playable it is on touchscreens, but on traditional consoles, it's very much one of those games that's easy to go back to and just pick up and play.
Capcom announced that Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 would be HD'd on the PS4. I don't know how HD 4 is going to be, because I remember the PC port that came out recently, and it was kind of meh.
Yeah.
But you can definitely tell the influence, or I suppose, the kind of occult following 4 has if they're going to be re-releasing it again. I'm really excited they're re-releasing 5 and 6, because I would love to play those games again with my friends on like a new console, or playing with my fiance. So I'm really excited for that. It's also, I think, an anniversary for Resident Evil this year.
Yeah.
It's like 20th or 21st. I'm not sure.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. So they're having like these big re-releases for those games.
Personally, I know I'm excited for the 5 re-release and hearing the Chris, come on, Sheva, come on.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, you can actually play it on the PS. You can play it through PS Now on PS4 right now if you wanted to.
And I feel like that all of this is just an indication of the fact that something that's been ported to every system, literally every system, you can probably even play it on Raspberry Pi. I don't know.
Probably. There's probably ATMs in the East that you can play it on while you're waiting in line or something, while you're waiting for your cash.
But I mean, that's just an indication that for whatever reason, Resident Evil 4 resonates with a lot of people, whether that's just purely from a gameplay perspective or from, looking just from the visuals and the visual design, like, or even the story. People care about it, and it made a difference in people's lives. And I think the quality of the game, plus just that societal impact in the way that it changed how we make art, is really important. So, yeah, give it a shot at the very least. I mean, I know you can rent it on PS4 right now for like $2. So, granted, that's only for 4 hours, but still. All right. Well, and Erik, where do you stand on this? I feel like we already know the answer because you nominated it, but
absolutely. Again, you can't deny the scale, the influence, and the impact it had on the video game industry, just as a whole, not just in the survival horror franchise. Just like the survival horror genre. Sorry. Mm-hmm. A lot of modern gaming wouldn't be the same without it, just like you had said. So even though it's by no means a perfect game, it's definitely one of the best games ever in terms of scale. So I would say yes.
And then where can people find you on Twitter and Twitch?
Twitter, I'm at Madam at Madadam_. And if anybody honestly wants to hit me up and talk to me about this, like, I'd love to hear your opinions, how you feel about this subject. If you're like a hardcore Resident Evil fan, I love talking to people about this. And on Twitch, I'm at Madadam__ because regular underscore was taken.
Really?
And yeah, it was taken.
Okay.
Amazing. I don't really stream too much. I stream Resident Evil sometimes, mostly Resident Evil 0, and a lot of Final Fantasy 14 because that's, I guess, just kind of become my life now.
Cool.
And, if you want to follow us and give us your opinion on Twitter, you can find us at bestgamesperiod on Twitter. Give us a shout out or say hi or complain about the crappy quality of the show, whatever. We'd love to hear from you. And you can, you are encouraged to share this if you like the show. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. I don't usually do the outro to the show because, Daniel usually does it, but he's not here today. So screw you, Daniel. Feel better. And next week, I believe we're talking about Red Dead Redemption. So yeah, thanks for listening, and see you next week. Hi, I'm Daniel. I played Rocket League. It was the best thing ever.
Lots and lots of Rocket League. Greatest game ever.